Welcome to Positive Talk with Kevin McDonald. Hey, that's me. Hi, and welcome to Positive Talk. Our show features the best positive stories and people from around the globe as we endeavor to answer the universal question of why am I here and what is my purpose? Understanding that can change everything, and knowing your greatness is fundamental to living your best life. So join us right now as together we work to create the adventure of our lifetime. Today, we get to talk to an author who is in the middle of the adventure of her lifetime. She's an author. She's got a couple of books out, one that we talked about. She's been on the show before, and we talked about my favorite topic was the 60s and early 70s, and then that in the olden times when I hate to think of how many people weren't even alive then. I had an associate. I said, we were talking about the 60s, and do you remember the 60s? She said, I was born in 1985. You know, it's like some what are you gonna do? But her name is Donna Conrad, and she's an author. She's got a book. I don't know how she did this, but she has a new book coming out that won a couple of awards, and it isn't even out yet. I don't know how that happens, but it's called The Last Magdalene. And it's coming out in April, I do believe, as well as there's going to be a series of them. I think I remember that correctly. There's going to be a series, right?
Yes, 4 books in the series.
Oh, very, very nice. And if you're wondering what the Last Magdalene is, it is a historical fiction about Mary Magdalene. And for those of you that may not have studied your Bible of late, Mary Magdalene was a principal female character in the New Testament. Matter of fact, she's only mentioned by one other Mary more, and that was the Mother Mary, the Virgin Mary. And so she was a major player in the Bible, in the New Testament. And there are rumors and thoughts about what happened and her life as it continued, including the fact that some people even say, and we'll talk about this, some people even say that the Holy Grail was carried by her from the Holy Land to what used to be called Gaul, which is now France, the south of France. So I don't know whether any of that's true. So we're going to ask Donna right now. Donna, how are you?
I am doing just fine and dandy. How about yourself?
Oh, I'm awesome. Thank you. It's great to see you again. And we can talk a little bit about the current book that's out, which is The House of the Moon. That's Keith Moon, but no, that's not Keith Moon. Could have been. But The House of the Moon, and also the Magdalene Chronicles, which the first of which is The Last Magdalene. And we can talk about how that was done. But you piqued my interest.
I did.
Because you are in the middle of writing an article about women and their place in history and how they show up and then they suddenly disappear. And I'm curious about that. And I know you do a lot of research. You even researched the crucifixion and the for lack of a better term, the art of how to crucify somebody.
Absolutely. An art to keeping somebody alive and tortured as long as possible. And the Romans excelled at that.
And they excelled at that because they got a lot of practice.
They got a lot of practice, unfortunately. Yes. And just as a side note, crucifixion was only for non-Roman citizens. So yes, they didn't share that torture with Roman citizens. But if you had a high crime against Rome and you were not a citizen, you got nailed to the cross.
And if you were a Roman citizen, I believe beheading was the thing of choice.
I think beheading or being thrown off the, I can't say Tarpeian rock, the big rock that Rome was based on, and they called it, I think, the Traitor's Rock. And so I don't know if you were beheaded first or not. Somebody out there will know this. I haven't studied that part of Roman history yet. I was focusing more on the Middle East.
And this is just a weird aside, but since you have studied history a great deal, and your books are historical in nature, I thought it would be interesting that, you know, we have been, as a human species, over time, we have been very, very mean to each other.
You think? Yes, I would say so. We have a select times in history when we've risen to the occasion of being kind, of being inclusive, of embracing our strengths, and helping to polish each other to become better, to be um, more kind, more loving. But those instances are overshadowed by the gross amount of man's inhumanity to man and to
I,
the environment and to animals. I mean, overall, we have some redeeming qualities, but not as many as the others.
exactly. I remember watching Braveheart for the first time.
Mm.
Did you ever see Braveheart?
Ah, yes.
And I had never heard of what they call drawing and quartering,
Oh,
uh,
yes.
which was which again was what they did with um, traders and
Traitors. Right.
people that had committed treason against the crown, as it were, or alleged to have committed
I
treason.
was going to go to alleged.
And in those days, since the king was the king and what he said went, if you were alleged to do something, well, you pretty much were convicted of it. Because
Absolutely.
it's amazing. But the draw and quartering that they did was actually sanitized in Braveheart.
I know.
It-
I know. I've read about it.
Isn't it's just amazing to me.
Mm.
It's the inhuman and people used to watch it. It was kind of like a Sunday afternoon thing.
That's what always gets me watching beheadings, drawn and quarter, hangings. This was a pastime. Now, I understand if you were in the feudal age and you were a part of the court, if you didn't show up to a public execution, then you were suspect of not supporting the monarch. So that was that. But at other times, why? Yeah, I don't even like boxing matches. They're too violent for me.
And then and I was talking with a gentleman the other day that was he's part of the MMA, which is the
Mhm.
mixed martial arts. The first time I saw that, yeah, I thought that is brutal. They're killing each other in there, and they're hitting each other with elbows and knees
Yes.
and it's I don't find that amusing. Of course, when I was young, in 1976, you know what movie came out besides Star Wars in 1976? Here's a
Rocky?
trivia. Dun, dun,
No.
dun, 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 dun. Yep, that's the Rocky. Hey,
Rocky.
Rocky came out in 76, and so I decided I was going to become a boxer.
Ooh.
And so I went to a gym in Seattle, and it was a professional gym, and they told me that, hey, you can be the next champion of the world. So I had one fight, got my face broken, and that was the end of my career.
That was it. I'm out of here. Well, I'm actually a black belt in karate.
Oh,
And
good for
so, yeah,
you.
I've had my nose broken a couple of times and things like that, but it was more for self-defense. And if you know, I mean, in House of the Moon, I was pretty much brutalized, and so I said never again, and went in and practiced for many years and received my black belt, and was pretty good at defending myself. But as far as for sport or competition, no, I was really into the mental training and then the ability to defend myself.
Congratulations, good for you. Because I
Thanks.
hate to say it, and I know you're writing about this. Women have had to defend themselves and continue to have to defend themselves at a horrible rate in our country and around the world, and
Absolutely.
it's terrible. It's terrible. So thought I I admire every woman who is on the planet, because virtually every one of you has been abused in some manner or form over the course of your lifetime.
Well, and discredited, as we're not important, our opinions don't matter, uh, and that we are a lesser species than man, especially men that are in positions of power. So
Why do you
yeah,
think
it
that?
is different. Ah, actually,
Yeah.
you want me to be honest here?
Well, I wouldn't have it any other way, because from my perspective, first of all, I have been, to the best of my knowledge, I have been very kind and affectionate and loving towards women, and I don't abuse them. I can't imagine being a narcissist, or some of the things that I hear about. So for me, it's a foreign thing. But what so in my world it doesn't happen, but in other worlds it does. And I would be curious
Mm,
to know, from a female's perspective, why it happens so much.
I go back to ancient times, and I think there's something that is intimidating and a bit scary and unexplained for men, women's ability to create life. Now, it's only been in history that we've learned that, okay, it takes a man also, and it's a male and female, chromosomes, all that. But at a time back, I'm talking prehistory, women could conceive, and it was even a question, how does that happen? And I
So it's
think that is a bit intimidating for men. And because we had matriarchal societies for a while, and they were run more as a consensus as opposed to an autocracy where, this person wants this, so everybody does what they want. It was more, okay, what is good for the tribe? What is good for all the people? What's good for the environment? And I think that has been gradually lost. And I can't really trace when this started happening, but I believe it began to make itself present when we moved from hunter gatherer to more of an agrarian society, where our land, our crops, all of that needed to be protected. And somehow it shifted to where the men who went out and hunted, the men who engaged in battle, that type of thing, began to take a prominence. And this, I would love to hear from actual historians, when this shift started happening. But it was a while ago. In the Mediterranean basin, it really became prominent when Rome expanded. And Rome had a very patriarchal system where the man was at the top of the pecking order, and women had no rights at all. They couldn't inherit property. They belonged to their fathers until they were married. Then they belonged to their husbands. And the men in their lives had life and death abilities to women. They could just say, okay, you're dead, and they would be executed. They would be thrown out of the family. And as Rome expanded into the Mediterranean basin, you've heard, when in Rome, do as Romans do. Well, it was make the world Rome. So they moved into areas, as in Egypt, where women ruled, where women had positions of power. And they said, okay, we're stopping that. They moved into Judea, where women could inherit, they could choose their husbands, they were judges in courts, they basically could choose their own fate. And Rome said, no, 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 no. This isn't going to happen. And so it spread out from the Roman Empire. And we're still living under Roman Empire perspectives. It's
which
why
which
we,
yeah, which of course the turned into the Holy Roman Empire, which
yes.
was then run by the Catholic Church.
And
And
that's why we have priests and as opposed to priestesses. But in the time in the Last Magdalene, her position is as a priestess, not as a priest. And in the book, I say something: when babes are hard to birth, a woman calls for a priestess, not a priest. And they were the healers, they were the midwives, they were the surrogates and the voice of the caring, loving, nurturing, creative aspects of divinity. And that got shoved aside with Christianity. And what people don't know, even in the second temple period, for the Hebrews, they were known as being a monotheistic. But that didn't really happen until later on. They had multiple deities. If you look now, and this is going to get me in trouble, but you have the archangels, who are, that's why they are called. So one of the first Hebrew names for Hebrew God was El. This is who Abraham spoke to. And so who do you have? You have archangels: Michael, Raphael, Gabriel, Uriel. They are all aspects of El, of that God. And there are still people who pray to them. You hear about people having a patron saint, Saint Michael, which is
yeah,
Michael, is an aspect of an ancient Hebrew god.
and
So,
exactly. Now, I'm curious. Well, a couple of things. First of all, I don't want to minimize the impact of a pregnancy and women bringing children into the world, because I mean, let's be real. The man spends 2 minutes, and the woman spends 9 months. So it's
well, more than that, like 18 years almost. Well, in prehistoric times, maybe only until about 7 years. And then the kid
yeah.
was off on their own. But
But I recall now that the Greeks had, like, Athena was a
mhm,
goddess, and they had churches that were done
absolutely.
by women, but that wasn't the case in Roman times, was it? Or did they
They
have?
did. Well, one, they had the Vestal Virgins, which is very interesting because they had to remain virginal, which is where, going back to it, we get the concept of the virgin birth, because in Rome it was very important to keep their women isolated and virginal, because a man can never be certain that he's the father of a child. So you have to keep your women locked away, and you
Yeah.
have to make them feel really bad if they're interested in sex, because that's no good. They're broodmares, and that's it to Rome. But they did have goddesses that they would make offerings to, but these were um, divine beings,
Right.
not
Eh,
made manifest.
right.
And so they might come down. You had many of them, and of course Zeus and Jupiter were married and had wives, and they reflected a family life. And so,
Yeah.
but it did not extend to the mortal realm, as far as I know. But
No.
in other areas outside of Rome, it did.
Now, I wanted to ask you, I was reading this just
Mhm.
the other day, and since you've done so much research around the book and around that particular time, and including, I'm sure that the language that was generally spoken at the time was Aramaic, and
Right.
they believe that Jesus spoke Aramaic, as did the people in Nazareth and those in the surrounding areas, and that when they translated, but the Bible was eventually translated from Greek to Hebrew and Greek into English and stuff. But the translation from Aramaic to Greek is not something that is generally talked about very much. And some of the words and terms that are in the Bible that have brought to us today were not necessarily spoken in Aramaic. As an example, I was reading, and correct me if I'm wrong, I was reading that the virgin, if we talk about the virgin birth, in Aramaic, it meant young woman. It didn't
Well, it
mean,
meant either a young woman or it meant a woman unto herself, meaning she did not belong to a man, which would be basically a young woman, or someone who was not married.
or that her husband had died, and or some.
Typically, no, they were referred to more as widows.
Oh, okay.
So, but it was a woman, to come from the Hebrew, it was a woman unto herself, which is the title of the third book in my series. When the Magdalene finally absorbs and synthesizes her teachings, her understanding, and becomes a woman unto herself and becomes a great teacher and a healer. So that word to the Greeks meant, oh, she hadn't had sex. She was not
Right.
known by a man. And so it gave this entire slant to the story that has
But
come down to us.
now, correct me if I'm wrong, which I often am, but there are other ancient stories and other ancient situations where they mention a virgin birth in other godlike folks that came before or around that time. Is that, have you found that to be true?
Absolutely, absolutely. But the uncommon factor in the other stories, it is typically immortals or gods and goddesses that are able to give birth to aspects of themselves without, I guess you would say, intercourse, without normal birthing methods, but not with a god and a mortal woman. I mean, you have, Zeus running around impregnating a lot of women, but none of them were virgins. They actually had sex with him and produced offsprings. But between god and goddess, yes, there's a lot, especially in the Hindu system and in other places. And if you think about it, giving birth to an aspect of divinity within yourself is something that doesn't require a physical birth. And I think in mythology, this is what they're speaking to. I mean, when you have Athena coming full blown from the head, that is the mental, the fighting, that aspect of the god that can come fully formed.
I'm enjoying this conversation immensely, by the way.
You're going back into my Jungian. I was training as a Jungian psychologist for a while. So
oh, cool. We need to talk
mythology.
about that. Donna Conrad is our guest, and I need to take a quick break, and then we're going to come right back, and we're going to talk more with her about this, and about. I would love to talk more about Jung too, because I think he's got some fascinating ideas. So we'll be right back.
They have your eyes. They have your ears. They have your smile. Now all they need is a little more of your time. Make a difference in your child's life, because anyone can be a father. It takes time to be a dad.
And welcome back to Positive Talk with Kevin McDonald. And yes, it does take a lot more effort to be a dad than it does to be a guy who impregnates somebody. So if
we were just talking to you, that fits.
Exactly. Be a good dad out there, if you wouldn't mind. I would really appreciate it. We need more of them out there at all. But we're talking with Donna Conrad, and she is a historically accurate person. She's been doing a lot of studying about ancient times and even the 60s and stuff. She's got a couple of books. Well, she's got one book out, and the second book is coming in April, on April 9th, I do believe. And that's The Last Magdalene. And I think, and it's already won a couple of awards, which is really outstanding. So congratulations for that. But we're also talking about women and their place and how it changed and to become, because at one time women were exalted, because I think you're right. The mystery of childbirth, without women, there would be no us, because they were the ones who could conceive and then have the baby. And before they figured out that A fits into B equals C, before they figured any of that
Exactly.
out, it was like, this is a miracle. How did this happen? Because I can just see those guys going, well, let's see. I did this one. I did this one. I did this one. I did that one. And that one came up pregnant. How did that happen? And they didn't, because you would think that it would be like
every time it would be easy.
Yeah, exactly. And of course, barren women were looked upon, women who could not have children for whatever reason, were looked upon in a very negative light in because they weren't able they weren't able to propagate the species. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Correct. And but some of them went on to be incredible healers and wise women in the village. And if you go back to, let's go back to Carlos Castaneda and Don Juan. And Don Juan said of one thing, that if a woman is a bruja, or a wise woman, or a sorceress, and she has a child, it punches a hole in her aura and it weakens her. So that seems like a rather misogynistic thing to say, because many women who have had children go on to be incredibly strong, dynamic women. But in that sense, I think that opens the door to women who have not born children to claim their own power, their own mastery over self, their own integration with the universe, with healing, with other people, because they're not diverted. And so I think, in a way, if you kind of take the patriarchal spin off of that, it gives a place for women who either chose or were not able to bear children, to be the wise women.
Well, in those days, you really didn't have a choice. I mean, if you couldn't have children because of a physical reason, but they married you off at like 14, and when you
12.
Oh, I gave them too much credit. 12. Okay.
Exactly. 12. And the thing is, so even I believe, someone can correct me, but King John married one of his wives at 12, but he waited for a year after she started her menses before he bedded her.
Well, and
so,
of course, in those days, they had, I believe, did not King Solomon have like 3,000 concubines and 500 wives kind of thing?
It was 700 wives as far as I know. And if you think of that, I have a whole theory about that. I've written a whole nother blog about that. And so there was something called the sacred marriage, and where the king is united with the land, which is always a woman, who is the fertility, who is the ability to produce life and to have crops and grains and all this type of stuff. So it is a fertility ritual. So if you figured however long Solomon was alive, if every full moon he had a different priestess and kept them all in a harem, you got a few people up there. You've got a few women hanging around out there.
Boy, no kidding. And now it seems to me that if a guy had, I don't know, 500, 700 wives, that he'd have a whole army of children. Did they? Do you have any idea?
Well, it's what you said. Not every time someone has sexual intercourse, a child is not conceived. You stand a better chance in the ancient days of that happening if it was on a full moon, because women's cycles went full moon to new moon. And but still, he would have quite a few children, and they would. But in those days, and especially among the Hebrews, the children were counted as a part of the tribe of the mother. Even though it was really clear Solomon was the father, they belonged to the tribe of whatever mother gave them birth. And if he was copulating with priestesses and women of high status from other tribes, those children would belong to those tribes.
And politically, it made sense for him to marry women from other tribes to make, because there were 12 tribes originally, and to make them a cohesive unit, because they were all intermarried.
Exactly. And they would marry. So yeah, the whole dynastic reign or bloodlines were closely watched. But when Solomon died and his son took over, the 10 northern tribes rebelled. So we were only left with the tribe of Judah and the tribe of Benjamin. And the Assyrians came in and wiped out the 10 northern tribes. Now there's some genetic proof that people survived, but as a tribe as a whole with any type of power was gone when the Assyrians wiped them out. So when you come down to New Testament times, there was only the tribe of Judah and the tribe of Benjamin.
Now, what happened to the tribe of Joseph?
Joseph?
Wasn't he one of the 12? No.
I think. Well, there were 12. There were 12 tribes, and if you're talking about,
well, I'm going back to.
So there were the 12 sons.
The 12 sons. One of them was Joseph. Was he?
Right, but I mean, according to history, all 10 tribes, the 10 northern tribes, which was Israel, and then when they rebelled, they split off, and the south was called Judea, and the north was called Israel. And the prophecy was that when a king in the line of Solomon appeared, he would reunite them. So during the time of the New Testament, there were two separate entities. One was Judea, and the other was Israel. And so when Jesus came along, he was the son of David. He was in the tribe of Judah, and he needed to marry into the tribe of Benjamin. And if you think about, the tribe of Judah owned Jerusalem. The tribe of Benjamin or Bethany owned all the land around it. So again, it was politically expedient. You've got to join these two tribes. And he was to fulfill the prophecy that when he drove out a formidable enemy or an occupier and sat upon the throne of David, the two kingdoms would be united, and there would be 1,000 years of a golden reign in Israel.
And hence, that's how he ended up getting crucified. You
don't tell Rome you're the real king. You just don't do it.
That's a short-term solution.
Exactly.
So we're talking with Donna Conrad. For me, this is fascinating. I love talking about history. And when we come back, we're going to talk more about those days and how they are repeating themselves. It seems like today in the Middle East, it seems really kind of the same. I would love her advice about that, but we need to take a quick station break. You're listening to Positive Talk with Kevin McDonald.
You're listening to Brushwood Media Network, the best in syndicated talk, news, and entertainment shows.
Last week, Brandon met a girl on a dating app. One day after work, he finally found the courage to ask her out. No answer. He started to panic. Was he being too pushy? Maybe it was too...
Hey, sorry I didn't respond. I was driving. I would love to go on a date. How does tonight sound?
Brandon tried to play it cool, but inside he knew a girl so smart, so responsible, she must be a keeper.
Radio. Speaking of keepers, we've got one with us today. This is Donna Conrad. She's the author of a couple of books, and she's learned a great deal about a bunch of stuff. One of which is I forget his first name. What was Jung's first name?
Carl.
That's right, Carl Jung. Tell us about what you learned in the philosophy of what he talked about.
Well, that's asking a lot.
Well, we got 25 minutes. Go.
25 minutes. Yeah, I can sum up Jung in that. I think the importance of Jung was in how we are all connected. He said that you have your consciousness, I have my consciousness, you have your experiences, I have mine. Everybody has their own experience. But as a species, there is a collective unconscious, something that is known to all of us on a deeper level, which is why you can speak to somebody of, let's say, of love, of acceptance, of family, and that goes across all barriers. It doesn't matter your upbringing or your nationality or the time in the world's existence you've lived. We have this collective base from which we all function. And to me, that is inclusive. And you and I have talked before. I believe we are all connected. We are all united in some way or another. And our differences in the hostility of experience is when we exclude a group of people or another person and say, no, you're different than me. So I don't like you. I'm afraid of you. And there's very little difference between all of us. And Jung explored this. He also explored the universal symbols that relate across any generation, across any background. And that to me was the most impressive aspect of Jung's philosophy and the part that has stayed with me the longest.
Even moving forward, Neil Donald Walsh in Conversations with God wrote and God was speaking here. He said, we are all one. We're all come from the same place. We're all the same energy. And tell me if you, I think I said something profound the other day.
Did you? I want to hear it.
We'll see. And this is a Jungian philosophy was that, because a gentleman was asking me, we have got right now in our society, there are such differences with when we're talking about gender and gender affiliation and who's a guy, who's a girl, and there's some confusion going on in that. And I said, well, isn't it true? And I think this is a Jungian philosophy. I said, isn't it true that we are all energetic beings having a physical experience? And there is male energy and there is female energy, and that's directly from him, I believe. He called it something else, but there's male and female energy. And so we are, each of us in our own way, blessed with our own energetic makeup, if you will. So some of us are really masculine and we have very little feminine energy, and some of us have more feminine energy if you're a man, more feminine energy and less masculine energy, and the reverse is also true for females. So sometimes your energetic makeup can lead you into a place where you think a little bit differently than somebody who is all man or all woman, and so that can create some of that confusion. Am I close? Was that
I believe you are, and I think the terms you're looking for is the anima and the
Ah,
animus.
that's it. Yes. The anima and
And
the animus.
we embody both of them
Yes.
at all times. And I do believe it. I think at any point in a person's life, one is more dominant than the other. And if you think about this, if, let's say a man is raised to think he always has to be strong, he cannot be emotional, he has to be all of these masculine things, then his animus is given more encouragement to manifest itself. And on the other side, if a woman thinks she needs to be soft and compliant and receiving as opposed to giving, then she has more of an anima. Her anima is given more encouragement to flourish. And to me, for a balance in life, they need to work together is the best outcome. But absolutely, and the whole gender fluidity, I think, is a part of our basic makeup, although we are born into one body or another. But if one or the other of the non-biological aspects takes precedent, then isn't it up to that person if they want to express themselves to the outer world as either the anima or the animus? And it's their decision, just like so many things is a personal decision. And to me, if it doesn't hurt anybody, if it's not violent, if it's not exclusive, what does it matter? Just let them do it.
And from my frame of mind, it doesn't. It shouldn't matter, because we're all the same. I mean, we're all, and that's where we're all one comes from, is that we're even if you are a man and you identify as a woman, or vice versa, or whatever, that's it's none of my business. I don't care. It's like there are people that that are so concerned with the gay lifestyle that they are really concerned about what these people do behind closed doors. Who cares? None of my business.
They care. And that's the problem. But they
Yeah.
care about a personal preference. And to me, a personal preference is something that's not impinging or trying to dominate another person. But if you get to the point where you're saying, this is what I believe, so you must believe this, you have to agree with me or you're wrong, that's where I draw a line. Because as I have said, even on your show, somebody else doesn't need to be wrong for me to be right.
Exactly.
We can both be right. And it's fine. But so many people don't feel that way. And it's sad, because I look at their lives and they're so filled with fear and with hatred and with self-importance that their lives have to be miserable.
Yeah, I know. I had a show, and it's still out there, and it was called My Independence Report, because we were declaring our independence from hate, division, and fear. And that is rampant in our society, and it's really everywhere. And even my dear mom, who's passed away now, so God rest her soul, and I used to go round and round and round and round and round about whether or not being gay was a choice or whether you were born. And I firmly believe that you were born with those dispositions that you have, and that's just the way it is. And she said, well, that may be true, but it's still a sin. So it's a sin. So what are you saying? You can be gay as long as you don't. And this is actually a point of view on some churches. As long as you don't act on it, you can be gay. We don't care. Well, but so what you're saying is there's a segment of our population that we're not going to allow them to love the people that they love, and to have full a life as other folks, because they're going to burn in hell if you do. So it's sad that we've taken that position when it doesn't affect. My mother has passed now. She is in heaven. I'm absolutely positive. It hasn't affected her in any way, shape, or form. So it doesn't matter. So people need to give up, I think, they need to give up that position because it doesn't hold.
Hmm.
What do you
Well,
think?
I think I go back to probably the connection between the 60s and love, and the Magdalene, who was a priestess of Ashara, and her main message was love, which is why she meshed so well with Yeshua that we know as Jesus. And I say, where there is love, there's no harm, no foul. I mean, if you truly love, that is adding beauty and grace and positivity into the world. And what can be wrong with that?
And I tell you, when we come back, I would love to be able to play it, but they'll sue us because the Beatles are very protective of their catalog.
All you need is love.
I want to talk about that briefly because if you weren't on the planet when they sang that song, then I want to educate you a little bit on that. We need to take a quick break.
We'll do it.
We'll be right back.
They have your eyes. They have your ears. They have your smile. Now all they need is a little more of your time. Make a difference in your child's life, because anyone can be a father. It takes time to be a dad.
And welcome back to Positive Talk with Kevin McDonald, and we're talking with who's become a really good friend of mine. She's and I'd like to say that because you are Donna Conrad. She's an author. She's a fellow survivor of the 60s, and she's written a book. It's called The House of the Moon: Surviving the 60s, because you make love, not war, and flower power and all that. There was a bit of a dark side to some of that, and she explores that as well as the good stuff in the book. But I wanted to focus on when the Beatles did All You Need Is Love. That was a simulcast that was carried around the world. It was the first one that was ever done like that. And John Lennon wrote the song, and it had not been out. It was a brand new song that he wrote for that event. And in those days, music was not about, just love your neighbor as yourself and all you need is love and that sort of thing. Do you recall when that came out? When they had
I do. It was to me, it was earth-shattering. It was, there was this very tyrannical, I hate to keep using the term patriarchal, but it was a male-dominated world of rules. We've got rules here. You have to do this. You can't do that. You can't do this. It was so repressive. And to hear somebody say, all you need is love. There's nothing you can say that can't be said. It was someone who had a global reach saying what we felt in our hearts. We said, oh, if you can just get back to loving your neighbor, loving yourself, loving the life that you're given, loving the animals around you, loving the earth, that's what we need. That's what the world needs. And for each person to embrace that, it was phenomenal.
And nothing that you can do that can't be done.
Be done.
And it was the lyrics that meant so much to so many, and it was a huge event, and that was, I believe, in 67.
I don't remember.
Either 67 or 68.
Yeah, my years are kind of messed up in the 60s there.
Well, there was a period of time when there was a chemical thing going on.
Yeah, there was a chemical thing going on that distorted time.
but just as an aside, if you're a student of the 60s, or if you want to become a student of the 60s, this is the book to get, because she, the funniest thing is that her father was an undercover narcotics agent, and her older sister had a boyfriend who fed rock stars drugs, and so she got to meet some really cool people like Jimi Hendrix and others, and sat in some really I imagine some really fun parties, or not so fun parties, depending upon who you were at the time.
Or
And
the drugs you were taking at the time,
exactly, or like
or
you said,
your age.
yeah, well, yeah, you were what, 14 or 15, and you got thrown in the back of a limousine and taken to a party? Those people would be in jail now.
They certainly would. And then I was also with Jim Morrison in a hotel room on my 15th birthday.
Was he as now I know he was a druggie, but was he more alcohol or more drugs?
I
Or was it just
think
a combination?
both. I would say when I knew him, he was more into the hallucinogens to the drugs, but there was always drinking involved. And he was an incredibly prescient poet, and had a mind that was so expansive when he was on drugs, when I knew him. As it seemed that his world and his talents and his thought process became narrowed when he was turning more to alcohol. And I find that still today, that alcohol tends to narrow your perceptions, and the doors of perceptions are more opened depending on your relationship to certain hallucinogens.
Well, and there was a movement going afoot now for natural hallucinogens that a lady told me that I interviewed. She's a hypnotherapist, and she said, "Yeah, I'm going down to Panama because they've got
Ah,
this place where I can go and I can have this ceremony, and then they give you hallucinogens, and it's all part of this great big ceremony, and you throw up for 12 hours. Then you have this amazing experience." It's like, wait, hold on, wait. Did you say you throw up
can
for
we
12
skip
hours?
that? I think that's like ayahuasca.
Yes.
Yeah, ayahuasca. I have heard that too. I have not. In my day, we did peyote, and
Yeah.
everybody else I knew would throw up. I never got nauseous on peyote, and they said the grandfather peyote must have really liked me.
Well,
I don't
you
know, but yeah,
you were just a titch older than me, so you got to experience, and you were in California at the time, and so that was a kind of a
Mhm.
hotbed of sex, drugs, and rock and roll, and everybody was having a good time, and it would have been a wild time to be down there.
It was a very wild time, and it was a time that we truly believed we could change the world and make it a better place. And that's one of the things. I mean, Hunter Thompson was one of my heroes. And he said, in his book, Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, he said, it was a time when anything could happen. We knew if we thought it, it could become a reality. And that to me was the true magic of the time. Now, whether or not that came to be in reality doesn't matter, but just the very thought process that if we think it, it can happen. And there were tremendous changes that came about from just having that mindset.
I agree. You know, one of the things is that was kind of a natural movement, and it wasn't like a guru who was on a mountaintop that was saying, you it was kind of organic. It kind of
Mhm.
hit everybody at the same time, and it kind of spread like wildfires. I remember it, that all you need is love, take care, make love, not war. Let's get out of Vietnam where our kids are dying, and the people, and it all was real organic. And then the powers that be decided that it wasn't going to be organic anymore, and so they They stomped it down, and I see some of that coming back today, only a little bit different in the fact that I think that the people that are interested in changing the world for better are a little bit more mature
Mhm.
about it this time, and it isn't a youth movement necessarily; it is a people
Mhm. It is, and the forces that oppose it are um, are a little more sophisticated also.
That is also true, and
So it is always a balance of the two, and the pendulum swings back and forth. And to me, the division in the country that happened in the 60s has swung back around, and we have the same type of division here between people who want to live their own lives, who are doing no harm, and people who says, no, you have to live your life my way. And this is a divide in the country once again that I hope will resolve itself to
peacefully.
something that's more peacefully and to establish more of an equilibrium.
And by the way, you're going to be writing a third book, and it's going to be about that. The similarities of what happened in the 60s, what's going on now, the pendulum going back and forth, because eventually it's got to go back in the right direction, and it's got to heal people, and they've got to feel better about each other. I have enjoyed this conversation again, Donna.
So
It's
have
so,
I. It's always
it's
wonderful to talk with you.
it's so much fun. I want you to tell everybody about yourself and anything that you'd like them to know. You got about a minute.
Oh, I've got about a minute. Well, you
No
can
pressure.
please. No pressure at all. Everything about me. Yeah, you'll find out a lot about me in House of the Moon. Nothing's held back. But my website is donnaconrad.com. And please sign up for it. There's going to be a drawing where 3 people will win a limited edition signed copy of The Last Magdalene hardback. And on the website, you can also get the lost chapters from House of the Moon. And the House of the Moon is out now, and The Last Magdalene will be released April 9th, but it is available for pre-sale right now. Barnes & Noble, Amazon, most platforms, and it would be great. And I'd love to hear from you all what you think of the writing and just what you think about life in general.
Exactly. It's a wonder. I still happen to believe that you and me in our lifetimes, which are the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and going forward, that we've seen cataclysmic change. We've had the most unique and positive experiences. We've had indoor plumbing our whole life, which I think is a really big deal.
Woo!
And anyway, it's been we've been very lucky, and
We
hope
have
that everybody
fortunate, yeah.
we've been
And
fortunate.
if you go back and you study history, you see how incredibly fortunate our time is.
Exactly.
Even with all of the upset in the world and people still needing food, people not being able to get the health care that they need, it is still a remarkable time in history.
And we're so lucky that we can leave our house and walk down the street and not see somebody being crucified.
Yeah,
So
I hadn't thought of that, but you're right.
that used to happen. There was we'll talk about that another time.
Another time.
Be glad that you don't have to look at that. That's just not worth. Donna Conrad, thank you so much for being here. Go to donnaconrad.com, find out all about her, get everything you need. And I want to thank you again for being here, my dear.
That is my pleasure. Thank you. It's always great to speak with you.
And you stay right there. Hey, thanks for enjoying this episode all the way to the end. Please give us a like and subscribe to this channel. This has been a production of positivetalkradio.net. Please visit our website, oddly named positivetalkradio.net, for more details about us and our mission, which is to provide great positive programming designed to inspire us all. I'm Kevin McDonald, and I'm proud of these shows, and I truly hope that you'll like them and share them with friends and family. So on behalf of our entire team, remember, be kind to